Welcome. My name's Kirk Turner. I'm a partner here at McAfee Taft. With me today are my partners Kristin Simpsen and Natalie Ramsey, and we're going to kind of walk you through the return to work package that we have put out in the last couple of weeks. We've had lots of great response and lots of questions about kind of what the package entails, and so we thought we'd get together and be able to do this kind of at one time instead of having to field a bunch of phone calls. We love your phone calls, but we thought this would be easier on you. So what we're going to do today is just kind of walk you through the policies and the procedures. We're going to walk you through the forms that we've created for employers, and then we're going to walk you through kind of the assessments and questionnaires that have also been developed. And I really do want to thank Kristin and Natalie because they really took the leadership on this particular project, and I think it's been great for our employers to have a lot of this work done for them. We're going to tell you, and they're certainly going to tell you, that one size does not fit all here. These need to be flexible, and you need to make sure it fits your particular organization. So that's one of the things that Kristin and Natalie and the team have done, is given you options so you can identify what works best for you. So as we start here, I think what we want to do initially, Natalie, if you would, just kind of talk about why we did this. What's the purpose of putting together this package?
Sure. So the idea of returning to work after being out on quarantine has been intimidating, not just for employers, but employees as well. They want to know what steps their employers are going to take to ensure that they're coming back to a place that is paying attention and it has their eye on the ball with respect to what the CDC is recommending, what their local and federal and state governments are recommending. And we wanted employers to have a level of comfort with respect to what they ought to be doing, what those recommendations are, and when they're asking employees to do things like don protective equipment, what they need to do. And so our plan here was to put together a fluid package of materials that gives people the opportunity to ask the questions of their own workplace. What makes sense for us? How are we going to implement this? What are the practical steps about implementing these kinds of things? And we make choices going forward. How should we evaluate our employees? How can we legally do it? And, it's really more of a conversation starter than anything else, but ultimately, it is a set of materials that if you answer a few questions, you'll be in a great position to transition back into the workplace with your employees and have everybody know what's expected, but from the moment they walk back in the door.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that you guys talked to us about is we just want clarity, right? We want clarity in those communications.
Right. We want people to have an understanding of what's expected of them, and we also want to be straightforward and transparent about what employers are going to do in order to try to keep their workplaces as safe as possible as people come back.
Why don't you start and just kind of, the first section is kind of employee screening and reporting. Kind of tell us what the purpose of that particular policy is.
Sure. So a lot of employers are wanting to take affirmative steps to evaluate and put people on notice about what their expectations are in terms of what their health status is. And the EEOC has made it clear that employers do have a bit more liberty than we're accustomed to ask questions about, particularly whether or not employees are suffering with COVID-related symptoms or they have temperatures. So we have put together a packet of materials that will allow employers to make some choices about getting self-assessment forms, having employees make affirmative representations about what their status is. We also have a section that they are going to be able to make some choices with respect to on temperature screenings. Those are also things that the EEOC has permitted for employers as people are transitioning back in. It fits for some. It won't fit for all. The practicalities of implementing temperature screening, I know a lot of employers have started to do. It's not an easy thing to do. But our policy sets forth a series of different examples of how to implement them, whether you're doing an infrared scan from behind a partition or you're going to have someone get geared up in PPE and taking those temperature scans. But it walks through the policies and the steps that will need to be followed so employers can really have an opportunity to wrap their arms around what it's going to look like if they're going to implement that temperature screening policy. The reporting obligations, we hear a lot about hotspots in the United States and in other countries. And so a lot of people are asking the question about whether or not people have traveled. If you've traveled across state lines, where have you been? It gives the employers the opportunity to ask relevant questions before people actually make it back into the workplace. So if we do have employees that have traveled to locations where we know that there is a large concentration of active COVID, we can decide whether or not it makes sense for us to continue a telework arrangement or to ask people to quarantine at home before they come back.
Yeah.
So one more aspect that, we're mindful of in connection with travel is, some employers are making decisions to restrict travel, both business travel, lots of non-essential business travel has been put on hold. And in many circumstances, employers are asking their employees to self-disclose any kind of personal travel that they've made plans for in advance of that travel so they can evaluate what their return to work policy or practice is going to be. Again, these are things that we put in place now. We all hope that things change and that these kinds of restrictions lessen. But in the immediate future, we think it's an important question to ask, and these restrictions are good to be mindful of and have employers put in place so that they can be aware of where their employees have been and keep an environment that is less exposed.
You also, in the package, there's also a discussion about social distancing. Can you talk a little bit about that? We've all heard that term. How's that relate to policies and procedures in the workplace?
So social distancing really plays into a lot of what we expect our staff to observe. And also, we want to make it clear that we as the employer are going to be mindful of and have an expectation and create an environment that fosters social distancing. So 6 feet is the magic number that people are encouraged to keep from at least a 6-foot distance amongst one another. This policy addresses things such as, traveling in and around the office. Some places may want to reconfigure workspaces so that they are one ways. We see lots of shopping environments that are that way. Quite frankly, we're seeing lots of office environments that are that way. We're thinking through things like elevator spacing and occupancy issues and how many people we're going to place in conference rooms and whether or not meetings are an appropriate thing to have at this point in time. Should we be doing teleconferences? Should we be, everybody's using Zoom? Should Zoom continue to be the new and great way to meet? But these are all questions and items that are addressed really designed to spark the conversation of how and in what way these kinds of restrictions or limitations from a social distance perspective fit into each employer's workplace.
Natalie's talked a little bit about some of the policies that are included. Let's talk a little bit more about the employer responsibilities that are covered in the package.
The policies that we put in place for our employers gives them guidance for things that they need to think about in implementing the return to work policies. One such thing that they need to think about is cleaning. They need to have a pretty robust cleaning program in place where we talk about high frequency touch areas like door handles, elevator buttons. They need to figure out what their schedule is going to be for cleaning and implement it that way. They also need to talk about physical changes to the workplace. Natalie talked about conference rooms, but other areas that we might want to talk about are kitchens and break rooms. Are you going to leave ice makers open? Are you going to restrict the number of people that are available in those spaces? You also want to have reminders for your employees because you can make all these changes, but if you don't tell your employees about it, you might as well not make them. So employers need to be posting signs about what the restrictions are inside the workplace, what limitations are new so that employees know about them.
And the policy package that you guys have put together covers all that in there.
It does. It provides options for employers. Again, this isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. So when you look at the policy, it says, kitchens, and it gives you 4 different examples of what you can do for your kitchen. And because what works in one employer's kitchen is not going to work in another employer's kitchen. We've done the same thing for break rooms. We've done the same thing for conference rooms. We have ideas for hallways, stairways, elevators, all of these different things. There are options for what will work best for your workplace.
Kristin, one of the things that you wanted to talk about in the return to work package was the addressing visitors as they are coming into the workplace.
Absolutely. Having rules about visitors is essential for contact tracing purposes, particularly in those workplaces that are going to be closed to the public. And by having rules about, visitors being escorted by your employees, by having signage up, by having the self-assessment so that you can have some assurance about the people coming into your workforce, you're taking those steps to help create a healthy workforce for your employees. And we take you through various options that you can implement with regard to those visitors. And we can talk through with with our clients about what steps are best for their workforce.
Perfect. One of the other things that's in there, Natalie, are testing programs. Can you talk a little bit about that? Why we have testing programs within the policy package?
Sure. Some employers are choosing to contract with private laboratories and offer opportunities for employees to be tested for COVID. There are also some opportunities, depending on those laboratories that employers are able to contract with, that will test for antibodies. There has been a recent announcement from the EEOC that employers can allow mandatory testing. Again, it's going to need to be something that you approach carefully. The ADA does have some limitations on how and when those things should be implemented. So it's something we would caution people about, not to just pick up and implement a mandatory testing policy, but if it's something that does interest an employer, particularly if there's a group of employees in a specific class or kind of position or job that maybe have another potential of higher level exposure, mandatory testing can be something to be explored, and we have kind of a template policy put together if that's something that an employer is interested in. So we go from voluntary options where people maybe want to just create the opportunity to send employees out for a test if they choose to have it, and then we go from that extreme to a mandatory testing policy. But we give employers that option to at least explore those things as they phase into returning to work.
Great. And then as we're finishing the policies themselves, there's an acknowledgement form. Why do we have an acknowledgement form on the return to work policies?
We lawyers, as a general rule, always want to ensure if you're going to take the time to create a policy, to set forth what your expectations are, it's important for you to have some opportunity for employees to acknowledge that they've sat down, they've read it, they've reviewed it. We want to have that on file because we want it to be clear that this is important enough to us to take the time to implement the policy, and we expect employees to follow it. And we expect employees to appreciate that we are going to follow it. So if there become any issues that warrant disciplinary action, there can be no confusion that the expectations have been clearly communicated.
Yeah, very good. We want to make sure everybody gets it. There's no exceptions. Everybody's subject to it. And so that it's clear that we're going to enforce the rules that the employer sets, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to some of the forms that have been created. And Natalie, why don't you just talk about kind of the thought behind the forms and how we're trying to help employers with taking things off their plate?
Sure. So the forms for me kind of dovetail with the acknowledgement. It's easy to say that you've read a policy and sign your name. The forms for me take it to the next step. The employee actually has to sit down and answer questions. We're going to ask employees the kinds of things about symptoms. We're going to ask them about travel. So there's an employee form that goes through all of those items, and it basically tells the employee, if your answer is yes to any of these questions, we're going to need you to reach out to Human Resources so we can make some evaluations about what is the next best step with respect to returning that employee to work. We also have forms prepared for employers that use contractors, because again, those folks are not completely under our control the way the employees might be. That relationship is a little different. And so we want to have a level of assurance that people we're bringing in from the outside to interact with our workforce. Again, we're trying to keep our employees safe, and we're also trying to ensure that our contractors are safe. And then our final layer of assessment form is for visitors. And everybody wants to have an environment that's welcoming. But we also want to have some level of control about what's coming in. And so if we've got someone that's coming into our facility, we want to have the same kinds of questions. We want to know what their exposure has been, if they're symptomatic. And we may need to restrict access for visitors for a period of time if there are markers that indicate that there's a level of risk for letting them in. But they are all respectful. Our visitor form is designed to be voluntary. If a visitor chooses not to fill it out, they just need to understand that they're likely not going to be afforded access to our facilities at this point in time. Again, we hope for change, but for now, this is something that, we've got these three different phases of assessment to evaluate the three different types of people who are going to be coming in and out of our work environments.
Yeah, and then some of those assessment forms, I take it, are going to be digitized or texting or something where they're going to be able to use it in a technological way.
There are some employers that have the ability to send out a text message blast, if you will. So sometimes at 5 or 6 in the morning, there might be an assessment that's sent out that has specific questions about symptoms, exposure, fever in the last, if they're running a fever over the 100.4 mark, and some employers are more aggressive even with that number. Those messages get a response. But yes, there are a host of options for methodologies. We provide paper forms in this packet, but we can also talk to employers about how best to implement an electronic version of an assessment as well.
Perfect. So we've talked about policies and procedures, and we've talked about some forms that are going to be helpful to assessing people's health situation. Then we've also developed a packet of information that we think are also helpful to our employers. Kristin, why don't you just talk a little bit about the packet that's been put together for our employers?
The packet is a great resource for employers. It starts out with a checklist that covers all the different things that employers need to think about when they're putting their return to work policies in place. It goes over many of the same areas that are in our policy, the options that employers have to select, but it also provides additional details such as creating access plans for your facility, which again, this is going to be geared specifically to what your work site is, because a building that is an office with elevators is going to be different from a single entrance, smaller office. Part of the employer checklist, again, is to start the conversation about, whether mask use is appropriate, whether there needs to be training for employees, if there are internal policies that need to be changed. Employers need to be aware of FMLA policies, ADA policies, other existing paid leave obligations that may exist. This is particularly important for those employers who have operations in states outside of Oklahoma, because state legislatures are passing different ordinances related to paid sick leave for COVID-19. So employers need to be aware of that. In addition to the checklist, which is kind of your how to do all of this to return your operations to being back in the office, we talk about what to do when you inevitably get a positive test or you get a presumed test. The CDC has set forth recommendations for what you need to do in your workplace as far as isolating the employee, telling other employees that they have been in contact with somebody who's been infected, cleaning procedures, and then allowing that employee to return back to work. And we provide step-by-step analysis of what needs to be done under those circumstances. And the importance of that is if you don't tell your employees that there's been exposure, there's potential liability under OSHA for failing to create a safe workplace. So it's important that this transmission of information to your employees continues to happen in a timely manner. And then in addition, we talk about once that employee is well, when can they come back? And we talk about the CDC's recommendations on that. There's a couple of different options that occur depending on if the employee has been able to have a test or not, which is a big problem right now still, the availability of tests.
And then what about this? Is there also some summary of cleaning recommendations that we've also included in the packet?
So the CDC has issued cleaning recommendations for different workplaces depending on the type of facility that it is. And we've included links to that resource, which is a great resource. And it talks about all the different things that employers have to take into account in developing cleaning protocols, not only from ideas of what needs to be cleaned, but compliance with OSHA from a material standpoint and a chemical standpoint.
Yeah. So you've essentially put all that information, the checklist and some of this other summary documents into one place.
Yes.
So where the employer can go and have it all kind of there for them.
It's all in one place so that they're not hunting around the CDC's website, which there's a lot of information out there. So it's nice that it's in one place for employers to have it at their fingertips.
Okay, good. So Natalie, in the return to work packet, there's also just some discussion about accommodations and FMLA issues. Why is that included in the packet?
Well, as people begin to return to work, there are going to be folks who are going to probably be advised by their physicians to maybe stay home. We're going to need to be mindful and aware of how FMLA, not just the Families First Coronavirus Act, is implicated in connection with the COVID pandemic, but actually FMLA leave itself may be implicated when you have people who have a serious health condition that may require them to remain out of the workplace for a period of time as the pandemic begins to settle down, we hope. Also, the ADA will be implicated. There may be the need to make accommodations and afford people the opportunity to telework if available. We can certainly help employers with telework policies as well that are specifically designed and geared toward this particular COVID-19 crisis. But those are policies that employers need to be very aware are implicated as we move back into the workplace, and there'll need to be some level of seamless transition in dealing with employees that have these issues.
We've also included a section on mask and gloves in this particular packet. Why have we done that, and what is generally contained?
The masks issue is, it's somewhat controversial. People we've seen some feedback from the media that people are reluctant to wear masks. Employers have to evaluate what is going to work best for them. Certainly, there are some areas in workplaces where masks are going to be mandatory, and those employers are likely already prepared to educate their employees on OSHA's guidelines for PPE and potentially even respiratory wear. But wearing a cloth face covering, a mandatory requirement, could implicate some need to comply with OSHA's training requirements. So if people are really evaluating strongly a mandatory mask wearing requirement, they need to know that there may be some steps they need to take under OSHA to ensure that they're properly training those employees before we make that mandate something that everyone has to live by.
Yeah. And then the last thing I think in the packet is some information about local Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Norman ordinances or orders.
Correct. So our local governments have been very active at issuing mandates and restrictions in certain areas that apply to certain industries. They've been very proactive, and so we're looking at layers of governmental review here. Certainly the federal government has taken some steps and has introduced some phased plans. Our state and others have taken some positions with respect to phased reopening plans. They've made recommendations that we think employers should be mindful of and evaluate. And then we even get down to the local government level. Sometimes it's cities, municipalities that are really holding employers to the line in certain areas of industry where in some instances masks are going to be required by local ordinance. In some industries, we're going to find that temperature screening is going to be required by local ordinance. And those things are changing. It's a fluid thing. Lots of those orders have short time frames, and so we find that those mandatory temperature screenings may be in place until the end of the month or the middle of the month, and then we see a new phase come out. What we hope here is with what we've put together, we'll be able to allow employers to pivot from being in a position to have to comply with temperature screens and know what that's going to look like to hopefully those restrictions lifting in the future, and then they can ease those restrictions or make choices that are a little different based on what those recommendations are, and they will be able to fairly seamlessly make those transitions with just a few edits.
Great. Well, so what we've done is just kind of walk you through quickly the packet that we put together. We have done this for you. We want it to be helpful. We know that this is a terribly stressful time and a time where it's uncertain, and so we're trying to help with some certainty. And so we want you to know it's available to you. If you have questions, you can certainly contact Natalie or Kristin or me or any other McAfee and Taft lawyer with whom you work. We would love to be available to answer your questions, and we hope that you'll take advantage of this opportunity because we think it's a great resource for you. And again, we've done it for you to help you during this time period. Thank you very much.